For her off-body carry gun, she got a full-size double-stack 9mm that fit her hands really well. It had a lower bore axis, which made it aim naturally and held over double the ammunition of her subcompact. She was always carrying a backpack with some books with her. She ordered online a new book bag that had a concealed compartment in it where a pistol could fit. The librarian, now taking an expressed interest in defending herself and her hoard of books, ordered private lessons for herself at the local indoor range. She was able to take advantage of a discount where they trained the ladies at a reduced cost to encourage them defending themselves from idiots. Most upstanding guys, after all, wouldn't miss a few less dirtbags not taking up tax dollars anymore if they were going to molest the ladies. Not much would miss them, actually, or nobody much would miss them, actually. If they were going to infringe on people's right to be left alone, that was on them, not on society. It was an interesting and thought-provoking mindset that almost everyone at the gun store and range shared. This was where apparently all of the law enforcement hung out. They assured her nobody would miss the scum and that her safety was the most important. So, off hours, she ended up getting lessons from off-duty police and prior military on how to properly use the weapons and transition. They started calling her Nines due to the common ammunition platform she chose. One night, she ended up seeing an elder gentleman from the library. They simply nodded to each other. Nines thought she noted a hint of a smile of approval from him, but wasn't sure. The punks never came back, but Nines knew if she was ever threatened again with mob utilizing force multipliers, she would be ready. As law enforcement reminded her nightly, they only ever came to document the aftermath. She did start to notice a few of the familiar faces around the library from there on, though. Chapter 4. Did you hear something? Library. Night of the collapse. Nines was sitting in her special nook. It was about closing time. There were some kids combing through some books trying to find out something for an exam they had the next day. It was a hot debate over which historical artist had been missing an ear. Apparently Blugel listed 3 completely different artists around the same time, all missing ears. They ranged from painters to musicians. And the theory was that people had been messing with the internet entries. The kids thought this information couldn't be accurate and decided the only reliable place to solve the mystery was the library. Nines had got all the books out that they needed, and they were pouring through it, taking tons of notes and photos with their phones. The kids were definitely going to get extra credit with this, Nines had thought to herself. She was legitimately training the next generation of kids that actually had a chance. Nines locked up, but let them study for a little longer. Their parents were in another corner reading, and Nines hardly ever left the library anymore, so she didn't mind. It was these little moments in life that kids would remember and shape them for their entire lives. Nines noticed a bigger storm than usual brewing outside. She'd been so buried in studies that she hadn't even checked the weather. She turned her NOAA radio on and it said that everyone should head home. The automated voice cycled through reading situations by location, and she wasn't going to be directly hit, but better to be safe than sorry. Nines alerted the adults and they wrapped up the kiddies and headed home. Nines suggested to have them get a little extra food and water if they didn't have it already. The adults looked at her like she was scaring them, so she shrugged. In all likelihood, based on what Nines had read, the stores could be ransacked within a few hours. If there was a storm brewing, Nines definitely wouldn't bother going home. Most of her preps were here, so she could wait it out. She locked up solid and receded back to her safe room of sorts. She shut all of the exterior lights off and looked at her monitors. Her perimeter cameras automatically switching to IR, and she could see about 100 yards out in each direction in pitch black. The chain stores across the way had closed down and everyone was leaving for the night. It had looked like more people were shopping than usual, but probably just buying their French toast rations. Nines joked to herself that whenever there was a storm, everyone went to go buy eggs, milk, bread, and toilet paper. All the things you needed to make French toast. It looked like the clerks had stayed a little late to make sure everyone got their goods, but the storm was picking up and management was sending everybody home. They locked the store up tight with chains, which was their storm-proofing protocol. Then it was quiet. She'd brought her NOAA portable radio into her sanctum. but let it idle. It continued repeating instructions as the warnings got more and more severe. Within a few hours, the power was out and the inner sanctuary of the library was cast into darkness. The wind howled outside, and Nines wasn't tired. She had been reading in the darkness ever since she was a child. She had lights of all shapes and different functions and varieties stored here. Sometimes she simply liked to read in the dark by light, so she was easily ready for this. There were sticky press lights that could run for weeks, electronic candles that took AA batteries that ran forever. Some of her light ran by crank, others ran by shaking. Some lights had two-way clips, so she could clip them to herself or other objects in one direction or the other. Those were her favorite. Nines had a great flashlight that wasn't much longer than a cell phone, but she didn't use it unless she needed to see far in the driving rain. It always stayed in her pocket, just in case. Nines also had a weapon light for her pistol that fit on the accessory rail. She had many backup batteries for it stored at the library, although it was only used sparingly for night drills. You could never have enough spare batteries, and they lasted forever under the right conditions. It wasn't like you held your weapon light on for long periods of time. That's what all the other flashlights were for, complete with lower lumens for sustainment and higher lumens for burst. Nines pulled her dedicated flashlight out of her pocket and checked it briefly. It worked, of course. She pulled out her sidearm and checked her weapon light. It worked, of course. She didn't have any cats anymore, or a significant other, and almost no utility bills from staying at the library, so she had money for these goodies. Nines had a roommate that took care of all the bills, and Nines threw her some cash as appropriate. It was usual for Nines to not come home or to be late. She usually took a bus to and from the library and to her apartment, so no car to worry about. Nines still tried to notify her roommate, but the gal had stopped worrying to care or check in lately. No doubt the roommate was hung up on some hunk, and therefore not paying any attention. Nines went to call anyway, but there was no answer. She tried a few more times, and it said the lines were busy. Nines decided she would try again in the morning. The rain on the windows several rooms away and the therapeutic droning of the NOAA radio put Nines to sleep. She dreamed of a dystopian future where identity politics had completely taken over, where you needed a security detail to go shopping, where violent criminals were processed by police that had taken over an old department store, then immediately released back into the public. Attacks were common, and everyone had banded into one identity group or the other solely to survive. If you were alone, you didn't last seconds. The inmates were finally running the asylum. Baseball bat attacks were just as common as knuckle dusters and needles hidden in people's sleeves. Chapter 5. The silence is deafening. Library. Morning after collapse. Nines woke up with a start as she got ambushed in her dream by someone with multiple needles hidden in both sleeves. She tried to block the flailing attack only to get stabbed around 20 times by the attacker with whatever filth that was in those needles. Nines tingled all over, realizing it wasn't from a dreamed attack, but from falling asleep at her desk in the library again. She heard some droning and realized it was coming from the radio. It wasn't talking about a storm. It was talking about something else. Civil unrest? Looting? Riots? Nines couldn't tell and shut the radio off so she could collect her thoughts. All the power was off. There was still a storm going on, but it was apparently the other end of the cycle now, so it would get weaker. Nines tried to mash a few buttons on her console, but nothing was working. Oh yeah, the power. I remember now. She picked up her cell phone, 0 bars. She went over to the landline. Upon picking up the receiver, a weird tone she'd never heard before played through. Nines turned her cell phone to wireless-only mode and flicked a few switches under her console. The library went from city electric to battery backup on the cameras, and a single electrical port shell was left empty. Nines got her charger out and plugged in her phone and then clicked on her security camera app. The cameras automatically switched to day mode, which turned the IR off. Her phone started charging right away, then cycled through all the outdoor security camera feeds. It looked like a hurricane had hit outside. There were some big puddles, but no major flooding. Some huge branches were laying around the parking lot like giant spears. Nines watched the feed cycle for around 10 minutes and saw no bus. No way I'm trying to walk back to the apartment in this. Nines opened up a drawer on the shelf and got out a blanket and some dry cereal. She put the blanket over herself and started munching away. She watched her cameras for a few minutes on her phone, didn't see anybody, so she shut it all off to save battery power. Her phone had charged decently with the rapid charger she had, and she checked the batteries, and they were basically at full power. When the storm completely passes, the solar panels up top will keep the battery tops off. Nines thought. She didn't have a generator. They were noisy and took fuel. Nines wouldn't allow anything noisy at the library.